This is really interesting. I think she must have gotten her pitch through her earpiece.
Here we go.
So I've actually been working on onsets. They're super, super, super useful. Notice how she's starting with an aspirate. It's actually deceptively difficult to start with an aspirate and slowly connect your folds. An aspirate is a right? It's you opening your folds through some sort of H sound. And it's a really good thing to practice when you're doing onsets, aka starting a note. There are entire exercises that are just starting a note, because that dictates a lot of what's going to come out of your mouth, right? So this is actually tricky, what she's doing. So that controlled way that she's going to closing her folds is deceptively hard. That's a really, really, really good breath control there. Whenever you have a recording that's like this on a phone, I don't know, for whatever reason, the perception when you're watching this sort of a thing is that they sound more flat than they actually are. So you might be listening to this and be like, isn't she 1 cent or 2 under? And I guarantee you, if you're there live, you don't hear it that way. It's just a weird thing about phone recordings. And more importantly than the pitch around the instrument is how they're tuning to each other. This is something that they do exceptionally well, is how they tune to one another. And it's interesting that Halle's taking the lower here, while Chloe's getting the high part. And this, so dotted notes, which is like exactly what you're hearing. When you have a dotted note, you want to lean into the first note. It's usually just more important than the following note. The following note is usually some sort of tie-off, and we're hearing that right here. And I find it really interesting how as she ascends, she's using different tricks here. So as she's going up, she wants straight tone, seemingly, I think, on the first note here. And that's actually really tough. As you ascend, there's a point where your folds start to separate. You can raise your larynx as much as you want, but at a certain point, you're kind of scraping the ceiling of how high you can go. The solution to that is to tilt either your thyroid cartilage or your cricoid cartilage. Thyroid cricoid. And then the other option is to flip into falsetto, or have at least non-closure of the folds. So when you have a little bit of openness, you can have a range of motion. There's some connection, there's some open, there's a little bit open. So to talk about like head voice versus falsetto is like misleading, because at what ratio of closure are you going to call it head voice, right? I think it's better to discuss it with how it works, which is there can be any range of motion of closure versus opening. And so what we're hearing here is as she ascends, we hear more of that breathy tone, because as she is ascending, she's trying to keep the straight tone. And so just the edges of the folds are vibrating, and then she's bringing them together on that note after the dotted. And it's really, again, this is deceptive because she's trying to be so gentle with it. You can even hear her kind of back off on this one. Oh, And this is why, like, they're so good. All of that work that Chloe just did sets up her sister, and the way that they join in is amazing. Chloe's still holding back here for a very good reason. She has a slightly lower voice than her sister. Usually that means more powerful. And so when she wants to give the space for Halle, she has to back it up a little bit. And I can't imagine two singers that are better at blending than Chloe and Halle, because they've been doing it their entire lives. So let's take it's hard to hear it, but let's take a deep listen to what Chloe is doing when Halle enters. You still have that little bit of a breathy tone. Meanwhile, Halle is coming in with a little bit more vocal closure, a little bit more power. Again, this is all intentional. And the rhythm is fantastic. The consonants and all that. I just recently picked up a rhythm training app that shows you how close you are to being right center on the beat. It is deceptively difficult to be perfectly in time. And when you're singing with someone else and you're anticipating harmonies, you kind of have to be right on the money, both of you. It is a lot more difficult also to get your note, right? And this is something that Chloe and Halle do very well when they start to sing together, is sometimes they don't have a reference pitch in the backing track or in the instrumentation or anything like that. They just kind of have to remember the intervals that they're singing in. So that requires a tremendous amount of musicianship. Musicianship? Yeah, that's a word. Now it's interesting, you see Halle is getting that vibrato in there, which is nice. It's a contrast to her sister, what she's doing musically. Now I wonder actually if what's making them hold back is possibly this feedback as well. Yeah, I don't know why that's causing feedback or what's going on there. But let's talk about the good stuff. Chloe using a change in vowel, to create this tone. When you move your tongue, lips, or whatever else, you're changing your vowel placement, would be another word. And there's a big difference between this sound and this sound. So watch her do that, exactly that. Let me bring it up a little bit more in terms of what you can see so that you can see it. I know, probably a good idea, right? So let's just maximize this so y'all can see this little move here. There. That is what I'm talking about. She's doing that for effect. And the effect is very obvious, right? But it's thinking about that effect and inserting it into the music that, I think is clever. Because, we always get taught, assume the position, sound beautiful. But no, sometimes. Sometimes you want a little nasty, Now it's interesting here. Halle's been using a lot of like classical sound in contrast to her sister, who's been doing like the more straight tone, a lot more rapping. And then as that's handed off to Halle, it's really interesting how they do it very differently. You can hear that vibrato. For the most part, the palate is lifted. It's a little drooped because if you have your soft palate lifted the whole time, it sounds very much like classical singing. The way that they come in on the same words is very reminiscent of a lot of hip hop, a lot of rap. And I love how they genre bend. I love it. They take a little bit of here and there, and they all put it together in a very, very unique way. It's interesting. I was told that when they're when they first started releasing music, people said it sounded old, and I never felt that way. I felt like maybe an homage to something that came earlier, but there are all these little things that they do that are references to different genres, different artists, different singers, and this is one of them. When you have a rap track or a rapper, which I am not, I have a sense of rhythm akin to a 2x4, but when I was taking recording classes, we did have a rapper who was good. And the way that he went about doubling, tripling, and making other decisions about what words he would emphasize, he would do this. But what's nice is that they can do it right off the bat. And I think that's really clever. Oh, yeah. I love this harmony. On. And this is what I mean, like, this will come in little nuggets every now and then. And it's just so nice because they're jumping in, right? They're jumping in to do this for each other, sometimes, you know, with different intervals. And listen to this backing track. It doesn't give them a lot of reference to where they are. So when Chloe or Halle jumps in harmony, it takes a lot of memorization and a lot of musicianship and usually a lot of hearing everything that's going on in advance, right? It requires a lot of familiarity with the piece because they're not getting any help at all. And I can tell, if you've ever been in a choir, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? The tenor's messed up or someone messed up. Now you're going to get called in and you're like, what's my note? And you take a guess and it goes terribly wrong and everyone notices. That is amplified because there's two of them. So a lot of confidence, a lot of skill. This is so clever. I love how she's rapping on pitch. That gives her options. Without naming names, there was a metal singer that was very had some choice words for screaming, and was saying that melody is harder to introduce into the song. I don't think melody is harder. I think creating something dynamic like this is harder, where she's giving the syllables of the words pitch, and again, that creates a reference for them to jump in with each other and create these really cool harmonies. I love how they're hitting the consonants together. And that's like fast. Digga digga. Those are probably 16th notes, right? And they're right on the money. If you are even off by a hair on a 16th note and you're trying to get in line with somebody else, it's super painfully obvious. Like, I'm not going to do like, you know what, maybe I will. 16th notes. You see how bad that is? Like, and you know, that's beatboxing, but beatboxing is basically just consonants, right? And vowels and all that stuff. So it's one of those things where you hear it going well and you don't think anything of it, but when you hear this, I want to talk about that note from Chloe a little bit. So, transitioning between different registers can be done a variety of different ways depending on the effect you want. Because I think, like we discussed in the beginning of the video, right, there's all of this range of motion. And then we're not even talking about tilts, right? So I think she wants to pop up and make the change of register obvious for dramatic purposes. And I think that's really that's really pretty, what she ended up on. And when we listen to what came before it, which was really, really thick folds, you can hear almost that it's not going to go up. So she makes a change and adjusts on the fly, which, you know, is smart and should be done if you're in such a situation. Now, similar to the 16th note thing that we were talking about, Chloe is now giving accents on the offbeat. So if it's actually, I'll just this hand will be Halle, this one will be Halle, Chloe. There we go. So that's what's going on, except I missed it because I was failing miserably. So just like in the 16th note situation, if that's messed up, it sounds really bad. And this is like what is very, very, very awesome about Chloe and Halle, that they can do these musical things that sound amazing together, but they're deceptively difficult. And they have it all throughout all of their songs. It's really cool. I want to point out something here too, and I actually have an entire video about this that no one watched, called How Chloe and Halle Blend. And this is something they do often. So remember that high note that we were talking about where Chloe transitioned into something that wasn't as heavy, like the folds weren't as thick? Listen to how she cuts out, basically using just her voice, no EQ. She's cutting out the lows of her voice to make more room for her sister. And then she goes to the low. Chloe has a lot of vocal range. She is a lower voice than her sister, but because they blend together on a regular basis since they were kids, right? They understand very well how to change their tone in a way that I think a lot of solo artists don't ever learn to do. Because if she's doing this, it doesn't sound necessarily powerful, but it's in the background supporting what is going on musically. And they'll constantly switch that up between each other. And then Halle takes the lower end of this. This is really cool. The other thing that I really want to talk about is how they're using their body. If you're what my theater professor lovingly called a floating head, and you're just like locked, that's really going to affect your sound. Everything involving the torso has a consequence in terms of an exhale and an inhale. Imagine crunching a balloon, and then as you blow it up, like that crunching prevents like a good voluptuous balloon. These are words. And when you squeeze them like that, balloons, they exhale harder, right? So this is kind of the scenario that you're in if you're really tight like this. Your inhales are a little bit more shallow, and your exhales are too forcible. That can result in cracking, going flat, a bunch of different effects vocally that are responsive to coughing. For example, false folds will come together in a cough. If you put too much air when you're singing, same thing will happen. The false folds will come together. And it doesn't really sound pretty. You can use that for effect, but it's something you want to do intentionally or not. So the reason I'm talking about this is that it's a good idea when you're performing to have maybe not like planned out choreography, but to allow yourself some movement in the torso, because it will help you tremendously. And I love how they actually have a wildly different approach to that. Ooh, that cutoff is really, really nice. Yeah, like that's another one of those things that's really, really hard to do, but very, very obvious. Like you don't notice it because it's working, but it's really obvious when it doesn't. Cutoffs, cutting off at the same time. Listen to like it's like perfect. See that? And they're even talking again about the way that people, you should move your torso when you're performing. That's exactly what happens here. like they're so in sync with one another. It's insane. This is another one of switching higher versus lower. So Holly's singing in her full voice. If Chloe comes in with this sort of counter melody, I guess we would call it, it would take away from what Halle is doing instead of adding to it. So she makes her vowels very, very bright. So if I do, oh, like you can tell that one's brighter than the other, right? So you can control what frequencies you're emphasizing based on what vowel you choose. And also you can do some laryngeal tricks like raise your larynx. So Chloe is given all of that. And then comes down for the rap. And then Halle starts doing the stuff where her voice is not going to occupy a lot of the lower frequencies. Her larynx is raising. Her soft palate is lifting. There are a couple examples of Halle being, both of them being an amazing musician. In particular, their songwriting will introduce interesting chords.
So this next song that we're about to sing is one of our favorite songs to perform together. It goes by the name of Do It. Yeah. So if you know it, we want you to dance. Okay. And we want you to sing along.
Just a spoiler alert, I won't be dancing. I am far too considerate about y'all. And frankly, I'd be concerned for my neighbors if I started dancing. It's like, hey, let's talk about it. But no, we don't. No, pandemic. Let's not talk about it. This is the concept of vowels that I was talking about before. Is happening right here. In that, when she's rapping, she's changing tone colors, and it's one of those things where when you see it, you're like, okay, that makes sense, right? If I change my mouth, if I do this versus this, that makes sense. But it's another thing to make those decisions artistically and apply them. In order to make those decisions make sense, you have to have a very rich understanding of not just the words you're saying and singing, but the intent behind those words. The fact that Chloe and Halle have acting experience, I think, really helps them get very specific about their phrasing and what they're doing with the words. And also lyricism. For a second, I thought that was their actual snaps. I didn't realize that could be a backing track, and I was like, whoa, the power of their snaps. And then I realized what was happening. Like, this stuff would be Thanos snapping if it weren't in the backing track. And this is, again, them using all of this really, really awesome stuff that is just borrowing from, like, they're genre bending, right? They're adopting all of these little things, and it makes the performance so nuanced. You can actually hear Halle's doing runs with like this classical vibrato while her sister is rapping and giving a vocal delivery that's way more on the rhythm side of things. And I just imagine some sort of pretentious conductor or opera fan going, and I love that a lot. They do these runs where they harmonize with one another, and it's nuts. Like, come on. So take the thing that I said before about 16th notes when they're being off. When they're off, it's awful, right? Right? That sounds terrible, objectively. And so when you have pitch added to that, you add to the complications of it. It's harder. I can words. And then you go right back to everything else. It's just, they're so dynamic, it's nuts. If you're a singer and you're looking to be good, one of the things you should start doing right now is recording yourself with multiple tracks. So there are tons of apps like looper apps. You can get a looper. Audacity is free. I would only use Audacity if you have a Mac, because if you're using a PC, I would get Reaper. Because the drivers on PC won't help you with what I'm talking about. And what I'm talking about is overdubbing, which requires very, very stable and very consistent rhythm. You might think you're in time practicing with a metronome, but those tiny little different variations will take a track that was good and make it, at best, mediocre. The fact that Chloe and Halle have been not only singing live together, but making albums and making recordings and covers together, they were forced to learn to be in time, because the act was Chloe and Halle, right? It's only now that they're doing stuff on their own, because, you know, Halle is getting that Disney bread bag, whatever you want to say. Good for her. Oh, I love that. This is so wonderful from Chloe. I don't, in the other performances I've heard of both of them, they've usually done it to where Halle's the higher voice and Chloe tends to take the lower harmonies. The beautiful thing about being able to do both is that, say one of you has a bad day. The voice is incredibly temperamental. You have all of these consequences physically, torso, like I just explained. So if you're stiff, lack of sleep, this is going to get in the way of you singing, right? Furthermore, if your folds are at all swollen, which is easy to have happen, for women, the size of the vocal folds are about the size of a dime, and then you have all these little things. Nothing is more temperamental in terms of instruments than the human voice. And so to be able to spot for one another when things aren't working out is just like an additional benefit to them working together as well as they do. So this like classical thing that Halle's doing, and then immediately Chloe going to this sort of R&B run. There we go. And that kind of R&B run is like dramatically different than classical singing. So you don't want to tilt your thyroid cartilage while you're doing these sort of R&B runs. The breath is very, very soft. The exhale is very, very soft. And when you do these sorts of runs, you droop your soft palate. And to have that ability to, like, she just did like a very classical approach to singing, then she was rapping, and then she's like R&B. It's impressive. They seem like so much fun. Like, someone says, "Come on, Ariel." Yeah, absolutely. This is so Disney. Disney singing is a style in and of itself, and really, what it is, it's a raised larynx, and it's a lifted soft palate. It's basically classical singing with a raised larynx. And one of the reasons why this sound became prevalent in Disney movies was because they hired women that were really phenomenal singers, but they were older than the roles that they were being asked to sing and play. And the reason why that's significant is that older women have usually richer, more powerful voices. The same is true for men. As you age, your folds are like a nose. They get larger. So with that comes bigger sound, right? So if they're trying, these older women are trying to sound young, they're going to raise their larynx. And so out of pure necessity, this became the sound. that we associate with Disney singing. And she's doing that right here. This is classical singing with a raised larynx. And what's really great about Halle doing Ariel is that when she lowers her larynx, which is doing on the bottom here, it still sounds age appropriate for a Disney princess because she's the age of a Disney princess.
Little Mermaid.
Let's get right into it.
So good to be here.
It truly meant so much to us. And it's like, listen.
I love this, like, and I pointed out earlier, but I really, really enjoy it. This sort of pitched way of talking, and particularly how they kind of drop it. So they'll be saying something on pitch, da 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 da, right? And that's kind of cool. It's this happy medium between rapping and singing. I just want to talk about the vocal quality for a second. Chloe's got this wonderful low. Like, man, that's so good. It's so velvety. Like, their voices are ridiculously pretty by themselves. I love this use of mic technique where she is doing a very, very light, like raised larynx, very thin folds, raised soft palate, and it's super light, and then she makes it even more light by putting her head away from the microphone here. And the way that she comes in, this is again like what we're talking about in the beginning of the video, onsets, the start of a note. When she comes in, it's super, super light. That takes a tremendous amount of breath control to start super light and gentle. On top of that, it's actually even more difficult in this instance because she's using a plosive consonant, B. Anytime you have a plosive consonant, pressure builds up in your mouth, throat, face hole in order to create that consonant. Right? All of these things create pressure. And if you put too much pressure on it, it's going to really hurt your ability to enter on pitch and to even sound good. So the fact that she starts it off very, very strong is really, really telling of her breath management. Nice. I like the rhythm at the end there. It's like a little syncopation there. I want to bring attention to this right here. Repetition is something that honestly I think blues artists do the best. Repeating a word over and over and over again is also actually in Baroque music. If you don't treat each word as its own kind of arc, or each phrase its own arc, and you just repeat the word, it gets really boring really fast. Look at all the different tools they use to make this term, busy boy, much more interesting as that goes on. Call and response. Change in rhythm. Change in rhythm again, and now there's singing involved. And then this finish is really cool. Is that like 7/8? 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 2 1. I don't know if it's actually 7/8 or like 5/8, but it's a syncopated rhythm regardless.
Oh my.
the harmony here is really, really interesting. So, triads, right? Right? Most pop music stays in that realm. But because of their background in R&B and I think jazz, they're using a lot of different what's called extended harmony. So if this is a triad, and this is a 7th chord, and then they have a 9th, and so if you can listen for those things, the sort of like chords with a little bit of something softer and more mellow to it. And another element of this that's really interesting is that they're using inversions to keep the lower part of this harmonic motion to be smooth. That's called voice leading. When you want to have a different change in harmony, but you don't want a chord like this. Right? That sounds so rigid and blocky. So good voice leading would be something like this. Right? And I threw a little jazzy in there. So it's minimal movement. You need you need a lot of knowledge of harmony, how chords are built, and then the ability to use those inversions and make these harmonic decisions melodic. That's what counterpoint is. So let's take a listen to these chords again. The switching between the snare sounds, which is really, really cool. Yeah. So there's this hi-hat on the snare here, and then it switches to clap. This is interesting because, like, there's all too often when people make and write their own music nowadays, they use very standard, like, MIDI, straight ahead beats, and they don't really do a lot of, like, cool things that, like, a drummer would do, like fills and all that stuff. They might have a drummer here. I think it's a backing track, though. But you hear these, like, little nuances in the way that the drums are programmed. I love how they come off of this. So they've established they keep it interesting in the arrangement almost always. Listen to the first Ungodly Hour here. And then listen to this one and how they come off of it. One comes off of it with rap, and then the other one is a sort of like dispersed, let's reset and build that drama again. They've only said it twice, and they're still thinking about variations and nuance. Ooh, wow. Super, super low soft palate here. The difference is actually quite dramatic. So if I, and anyone here wants to lift their soft palate, and inhale K, it will show you exactly what a lifted soft palate will feel like. So, and the thing that she's doing that's really interesting here, because I'm trying to get rid of it, if you have tension in your traps or there's a contraction in your traps in the back of your neck, it will actually lower your soft palate. So she's getting this extreme lowered soft palate because she's lowering it intentionally and then doing this sort of a thing with her back. It's almost like over the top. The word is in, right? In, right? It's super low. Or I think that there's 3 muscles in the soft palate, right? 2 sides and 1 in the middle. The one in the middle is up at all times. Because if you didn't do it, it would actually sound like you have a speech impediment. And so this is the sides of the soft palate that she's controlling. Love me, love me, love me, love me, love me. It's like angelic. Love me, love me, love me, love me, love me. So not only is her torso, and this applies to both of them, their torsos are incredibly loose, which is something I need to work on. I need to go and stretch like an actual singer. But it's also the gentleness that she's bringing. And that matters quite a bit. If you go real ham on your low, say like, and you might think that sounds satisfying. Obviously you don't. But in your head, you might think that sounds satisfying. And then you try to go up. Uh-oh. So when you have a forceful exhale, you really limit how high you can go in that particular phrase until you take another breath. Where this is additionally difficult is when you start on a high note in the middle of a phrase. Let's see if I can even do this. So to do that abruptly, she just kind of does it like that. I have to think about it. I haven't been practicing as much as I should, but she just does it. Both of them. Right on cue. Seemingly it doesn't even matter what part of the range they're in.
Love me, love me, love me, love me, love me.
And what's also happening here is that since L is a pitched consonant, anytime you have a voiced consonant, you can add a pitch to it. So what she's doing here is she actually has very consistent breath pressure, but the L makes it sound like she is having like this softer and bigger kind of thing. But that's not what's happening. She's making the same volume, the same breath, and then when you add in the L, inherently you obstruct the vocal tract. So you lose volume. And it gives this interesting little thing here. So she's really just singing through that entire phrase, aside from the parts where she obviously stops. But it's smart. There's a lot of things they do to mix things up that are really smart. Interestingly enough, their runs are very consistent in terms of reusing motifs. So if you do a run that's a scale, no one's going to care. But if you do like... So that's like a little melodic idea repeating itself in sequence, right? Sequential motion. So she's doing that, and they both have this very similar and simple way of going through these motifs when they do their runs. It's not that they have super complicated runs. They're not trying to be really impressive with the notes that they're singing. It's just simple motifs executed brilliantly. So the runs are not complicated musically, but the execution technically is marvelous. It sounds wonderful. And there she's using a couple different motifs. By the way, motifs is just like a melodic idea, right? That would be a motif. That's pretty cool. Again, with the being in time with each other. I am also happy.
Really good tonight. Like, beautiful. Iced out today. I'm like, but my heart is truly full. You know, I think I can speak for both my sister and I how much music fills up our spirits. And to be able to share with you all face to face with this connection, it's so special. And oh, I love your eyeliner. Beautiful.
And segue.
Wow. And something like this we don't take for granted, so thank you for sharing this with us. And I'm happy we're doing it safely and having fun. And yeah, without further ado, this is our last song.
Yes, this is cool, people.
There is a famous viral clip of me bawling to this, so no clipping, please. I did an analysis of the harmony of this tune on this channel. Again, not my most popular video, but definitely something you should check out if you really like this. Their songwriting. What you're going to see here from Halle is that she's going to enter on a chord tone. So if I have do, mi, so, mi, do, in a scale that's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, mi, so, mi, do, right? That triad, the one chord there, do, mi, so would be chord tones, right? So when we make melodies, we usually want to end on a chord tone. 5 ending on different chord tones have different sort of effects. And what she does that is so cool is that she's actually going to do what's called mode mixture. So if you're in major, this is a 1-4-5 progression. There we go. There we go, 1-4-5. And so they're going to actually do what's called, mode mixture. So this is 1, and they're going to change the 4 to this. And it's really cool. This is my instrument. And so she actually starts the modulation melodically with her own voice. So she is such a musician that she is going to initiate the change in key or the mode mixture. It's really cool. And it brings us to a very, very different place. These young composers, young songwriters, once they learn about things like mode mixture, they start trying to find an excuse to put it in everything, right? There's this cool new idea that they want to play with. It takes a very, very mature composer or songwriter to recreate the same idea in different ways. This melody that's haunting and beautiful is something that they're playing with over and over and over again using different ideas. This legato, the evenness of the phrase, is wonderful. It's really, legato is very difficult because you're at the mercy of your exhale. You're at the mercy of your breath. So if I do, so this is a Mozart piece that traverses through my registers, right? You see how I'm kind of, it's not butter. It's not butter. It's uneven. I haven't warmed up or anything like that, so that's my excuse. But it's not as smooth as it could be. It's difficult. You need a very, very loose torso, but you can't be like this. You have to have good posture. And this is the hardest thing to teach in all of singing because it's difficult for me to say to a student, go stretch for an hour and then sing. Or don't live a sedentary life because your quadratus lumborum is tight and that's affecting your traps. And these are very difficult things to teach. It's only possible to sound this graceful when your posture and your body are relaxed and in line. I love these different vowels here. So she's doing what, it's a little bit of a pretentious term called covering. She's just lowering her soft palate. I don't know if you can hear that, but who let the dogs out? Okay, and I'm done. Mind, the vowel is different. It's more, the palates are down. So this reminds me versus this reminds me of. And then when she goes down, she brightens the vowel. This keeps the phrase pretty even. If you do this reminds me of, and you accentuate the high by lifting the soft palate, and you accentuate the low by going with that lower note, it's not as smooth as what she's doing, which it reminds me of. It's the brighter vowel on the bottom makes a big difference here. This little head movement here helps. When she comes in, you can actually see she's a little stiff here. Please don't think I'm dogging on her. Mistakes happen. It's how you recover that matters. The breath is, anytime you have that sort of really fast vibrato, There's a breath issue. And immediately she recovers. Immediately on the second breath, she just fixes it. That takes a lot of familiarity with your body to be able to fix it that quickly. And one of the things that she does too is she has this really quick vibrato here. Then she starts singing straight tone like this. And then when she needs to move, she moves. Physically, she moves. Try tightening your bicep while you're doing this. You cannot do it. You cannot lock what is in motion. So if she's having tension issues and she does this at the end of the phrase, that's probably the smartest thing you can do. I gotta admit, this is the part that always gets me right here. Their voices are so beautiful. Technique can help with tone. It can. Body work, I think, has the most effect on tone because every little posture imperfection is going to affect the ease in which you sing, and so that will affect tone. But there is a limit to how much you can change and work on your tone. At the end of the day, your anatomy decides how the sound coming out of your face hole sounds. And so they just have a beautiful sound as well as really good technique. Oh my God, what a beautiful, beautiful song with amazing singing. There was somewhere that she switched from classical to belting, but I don't even care. It was just really good.